Hey guys, this is Joe Harper here with Reformed Truth Through Ministries. In today's video, I'm going to be doing a movie review of a new documentary that came out, and it is called American Jesuits, A History of Jesuitism Inside the United States. And this is put out by Adullam Films, that's led by Christian J Pinto. So if you've never heard of Adullam Films, Christian J Pinto, he's put out a lot of documentaries in the past, and he's put out some really excellent stuff. Even though I've never met him personally, he's somebody whose work I've really respected and appreciated over the years. Christian J. Pinto and Adullam Films, they've done films talking about the history of the Bible. They've done things defending the King James Bible and the Textus Receptus, and they've talked about that issue at length. They've talked about the secret history of the United States, and he's been willing to talk about things like the Vatican and Rome, and he's even talked about things like Freemasonry and their influence in the United States, the Illuminati. So he's always covered things that are good that many segments of Christianity don't always want to talk about, but he's always done these films that he makes. They're always very well researched, they're very well documented, and when you watch them, it's like having somebody who's done all the research and they're just giving you all the answers to the test. And you just get book quotes and citations, and they're just really, really well done documentaries. I have a few of them here. This is from his History of the Bible series. He's done A Lamp in the Dark, the History of the Bible. This is the first one he did in his series on the history of the Bible, and he talks a lot about the Protestant Reformation, the papacy in the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, how the Bible is forbidden, how true Christians like the Waldenses were persecuted. He talks about the Protestant Reformation, the Jesuits, how the King James Bible came about, men like William Tyndale. Just a really good documentary. And then, he's did the sequel here with Tares Among the Wheat. He talked about the Codex Sinaiticus and how it was discovered by this man named Tischendorf, and how he even got an audience with the Pope at the time, and really how these two main manuscripts, Codex Sinaiticus and Vaticanus, form the critical text that underlies our Bible. And then in the third in this series was Bridge to Babylon. Really good, and this is the one where he really gets in. I felt like he went into the most details of the textual differences between the Textus Receptus and what is called the critical text. But so those are just three really, really excellent documentaries on the Bible. And even though I don't have the DVDs in front of me, I've watched his documentaries called The Secret History of the United States. He talked about the history of the dollar bill, or the history of the architecture in Washington, D.C., which was all made by Masons. So yeah, they've just done a lot of really good stuff. So this one that I'm reviewing today, American Jesuits, I just really appreciated this documentary so much. My first impressions of it, as I'm going to do this review today, is that I really enjoyed it. I really thought it was good, and I really fist pumped and went yes, because I felt like he really made a timely movie at a time when people need this. I've talked about this issue with people, either it's been in my personal life, with friends or family members, or people at church members, or people I've gone to church with in the past, fellow Christians. And it's like anything you try to talk about with people, and I'm condensing years of my life down. I don't, this isn't something you bring up every day. There's wisdom, time, and a place. But I've had some people who are very open and receptive, even people who have seen um, that the Jesuits are really prominent in history and in current events and in the world political scene. And I've had some people who have kind of laughed at me, like, here Joe goes with the Jesuits again. So to see Christian J. Pinto making this documentary and really trying to go into detail and say, hey, these people, they're big, they're powerful, they have an influence, and even a sinister influence on the United States. For him to make a documentary where he's willing to talk about this in detail and document it, and he quotes so many great books of the past in this documentary. I just was so appreciative of this. And really, a lot of what I've learned about the Jesuits, I've originally learned from him, because he's talked about this in his other documentaries. So a lot of what I've done with Reformed Truth and Ministry, when I've talked about Rome or the Vatican or the Jesuits, I've talked about this in the 2 books I've written on whether it's my book on historicist postmillennialism called Lost Eschatology, or my book on the history of the world, the hidden enemies, the Antichrist, the New World Order, the true history of the world. All of that in both of those books, I've talked about how Rome is mystery Babylon. The man of sin is the Pope of Rome, the papacy. That's the classic Protestant view, and that the Jesuits are powerful and prominent, and they play a huge role in the politics and power scene of the world stage. And so I just was really appreciative that Christian J Pinto made this documentary where he's willing to talk about that. And that's why I've wanted to do an entire video giving a review of this documentary, and to a certain extent giving it some love and promoting it, because it's just something that this is something where evangelical Protestants, Bible believing Christians who call themselves, even if you call yourself an evangelical or even a fundamentalist or a Bible believing Christian, a conservative Christian, a Protestant, any of those terms for conservative Bible believing Christianity, if you're anywhere in that umbrella, you really need to be aware of this, because this is just something that's really important. This is an important issue because the Jesuits, let me just summarize this really quick. If you don't know anything about the Jesuits, they were founded in the 16th century by Ignatius of Loyola, and he was a Spanish soldier who got wounded in battle. He got hit by a cannonball, and he was recovering in this castle in his homeland, and he ended up reading the books of Roman Catholic saints, and he got inspired to change his career, because his career as a soldier had essentially been ended because of his wounds in battle. And he decided to dedicate his life to the service of the Roman Catholic Church as a priest. And he had these visions of the Virgin Mary, and he believed that his goal was to become a quote soldier for the Roman Catholic Church, and he founded this order, the Jesuits, for the express purpose of fighting against Protestantism. So if you're a Protestant, and when I use the term Protestant, even though there have been, of course, many professing Christians who have called themselves Protestants in history who have not been true Christians. But when I hear the term Protestantism, in my head, I think true Bible believing Christianity. People who have believed in the true gospel of sovereign grace, the grace of God alone for salvation in Jesus Christ alone, through faith alone, not faith in works, not this system of purgatory and indulgences and works and all this other garbage. And I think of Bible, sola scriptura. So when you hear Protestantism, you think Bible believing Christianity. And this man, Ignatius of Loyola, founded this order for the express purpose of fighting against Protestantism, against biblical Christianity. Because even though the Protestant Reformation it was an imperfect movement. Many of the continental reformers like Luther and Calvin, they were imperfect, and they would even at times they persecuted Baptists, whatever. But generally speaking, the Protestant Reformation was a true movement of God that brought about great good, and that there was an explosion in biblical literacy. The Bible was translated into the vernacular languages. The Bible had been forbidden from the lay people in Europe for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Really, the Bible that was in use at that time was the Latin Vulgate that was translated by Jerome back in the 4th or the 5th I think the 5th century. And he had translated it from the Hebrew and the Greek into Latin, and that was back when people actually spoke Latin. But by the time you get to the Protestant Reformation over 1,000 years later, Latin was not commonly spoken anymore. It had become a language of the academics. So the Protestant Reformation was an extremely valuable movement. And this man, Ignatius of Loyola, he founded what was called the Society of Jesus, which has become known as the Jesuit order, to fight against this great movement of God, to fight against it. And it was a movement. This is because this order and this man has always been under the influence of Satan. And history has just proved that time and again. And when you go through the history of the Jesuits, you read all the books that have been written on this topic. you you see that they have assassinated kings and presidents and political leaders to get their way. They have infiltrated, whether into churches, they've infiltrated into positions of political power in various countries. You know, they've done all forms of manipulation, lies, deceit, political assassinations, murders. Not all of these means have been ways that they have gone and gained power. And this history attests to this. So I was really appreciative that this documentary really tried to cover this. And what he really did was he really talked about how this has influenced American political history and really even contemporary political history in the United States. And a lot of things that are going on in the United States is we're seeing our constitutional freedoms they are being erased away more and more, and we're moving more from a constitutional republic really into we're really being ruled by an elite oligarchy, and we're moving more toward a more tyrannical political system. And our nation's sovereignty is being erased as we're being integrated into this globalist new world order system. You know, this is why a documentary like this is necessary, because we are living, a sign of a discerning Christian is to understand the signs of the times. And the signs of the times we're living in right now would say that this is what's going on. So that being said, I'm going to talk about next. I'm just going to summarize some of the stuff that was talked about in this documentary very briefly without spoiling anything. But he covered a lot of Christian J Pinto in this documentary, and he narrates it, and there's people who he interviews in the documentary. Um, One of the people who was in the documentary that I thought was really cool, he had Sean Wilcock from Bible Based Ministries. I've followed his ministry for a lot of years, and he's someone else who I've learned a lot about the King James Bible or historicism or Rome. Um, he really has done a lot of work with his ministry from South Africa called Bible Based Ministries. So it was kind of cool that he was in the documentary, and Christian J Pinto had interviewed him and posted that even some months back, it might have been a full year before. If you go on to Adullam Films YouTube channel, there's that interview in two parts that was posted between Sean Wilcock and Christian J Pinto, and I watched that, and I was really appreciative of that. I thought that was really excellent. So that was cool to see. Yeah, but there was another, he had Dr. David Daniels from Chick Publications. And I don't agree with Chick Publications on everything. They're typically been Arminian, and they've had some factual errors on something, but some of the stuff that they've put out in their comics and whatever have been very good. They've talked about Rome and the Jesuits, and they've defended things like the King James Bible in the past. So yeah, he was interviewed in it, and there was a guy from Canada. I think his name was Paul Syrup. So he interviewed a lot of really good people in the documentary, which was really great. But some of the topics that got covered was the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, and the documentary did a good job talking about that. He talked about Charles Chiniquy, which was really cool in the documentary. If you've never read the book 50 Years in the Church of Rome, that's an outstanding book. I found that when I read that the first time to be a very emotionally moving book, as Charles Chiniquy was a Roman Catholic priest who got converted and saved, and he became a Protestant Christian, and he befriended Abraham Lincoln in real life, and Abraham Lincoln defended him in the courts of Illinois before he became president. But then Charles Chiniquy was even friends with Lincoln while Lincoln was in the White House, and went and visited him on a number of different occasions in the White House. And all of this history was talked about in the documentary, which was really cool. But yeah, the book 50 Years in the Church of Rome is an outstanding book. I would highly recommend that book. It's a very moving book. And this is what was so great about this documentary, was that all of this history that many people don't know. A lot of these books are they're either out of print on they're completely out of print altogether, or they are in print, but many people just don't know about them anymore. And that's why this documentary is so good, because you can know Christian J Pinto's research was really excellent. He's read all of these books on Jesuitism. Many of them are out of print, or they're being put out by small Protestant publishers. And so the research was outstanding. And then some of the other topics talked about in this documentary, he talks about the influence of the Jesuits on the deep state. He talks about the deep state and what it is in the United States, and how since the end of World War II we've really transitioned more and more of this secret bureaucratic government of the military and the intelligence agencies and government agencies have really played a more and more secretive and sinister role on American political policy, both foreign policy and domestic policy. And Christian J. Pinto talks about how the Jesuits have power and connections over that world. And I really appreciated that he was willing to talk about that. And he really talked a lot in this documentary about the influence the Jesuits have had on the CIA. And he talked about how, the founder of the CIA, William Donovan, was a devout Roman Catholic, and he was even given a medal of Saint Sylvester from the Vatican. And he talked a lot about how Rome has had a huge influence on the CIA, that Georgetown University has produced not only many politicians, but many influential agents and leaders in the Central Intelligence Agency. So that was really good. He talked about the relationship the Jesuits have had with Hollywood and all of the things that have gone on there. And he talked a lot, especially kind of near the end of the documentary, he talked a lot about the influence the Jesuits have had on Adolf Hitler, the Nazi movement in Germany, really fascism in Europe as a whole, whether Italian fascism or German Nazism, all of that, that the Jesuits had a really large role in all of that during World War II. They mentioned the book by Edmund Paris, The Secret History of the Jesuits, another outstanding book on the Jesuits. It was talked about in the documentary. And so that was really great. There just was a lot of great topics that were talked about in this documentary. And the great thing would be if somebody wanted to do really deeper research into the Jesuits and Jesuitism, what I would recommend is watch this documentary, and then you can go back and start to look up the books that are being cited and quoted, and then you can start to go and read and do great. Because documentaries like this, they're so great because you're getting a bunch of information that if you read all the books, it take you days and weeks, and you get this in a few hours and you get all this information. But if you're really going to do really deep research, you got to go to the next level, and you got to start reading books. You just have to read. If you're going to do any research that's worth its salt on any topics, you got to do the work. Starting on the internet, I mean, there's nothing wrong with starting on YouTube. It's starting on, even Wikipedia. To start, that's fine. You can't end there, or reading stuff on Google. If you Google something, you read a bunch of, the first 10 searches, that's a great place to start. But eventually you got to go to the literature, and you got to cite stuff, and you got to get into footnotes and bibliographies and citations. That's just what research is. So anyway, I digress, but yeah, I would really give this documentary a really like a 9 or a 9.5 out of 10. It was outstanding. I really loved it. There were a few minor criticisms, if you want to even call them criticisms, but one thing I'll say is that Christian J. Pinto's documentaries are, this was true of this one, and it's been true of all of his documentaries. They're usually pretty long. This one is around 2 hours and 50 minutes, so it's just under 3 hours. I mean, that's the same as your standard, a lot of Hollywood movies nowadays, they're 2.5 to 3 hours. They can get kind of long, but I'll admit, even as someone who loves history and loves this material, I got up, I paused it and got up a few times and went to the bathroom and, or I got a snack and came back and sat down and finished it because it's hard to sit through everything, so the length I mean, you can take that. Is that a criticism? Is it not? But once again, he has so much material to cover, and you got to compress it all in. And really, 2 hours and 50 minutes, he could have talked about this. This documentary could have easily been twice as long because there's so much that he didn't talk about, and he could have. So I don't even consider that. I consider that a pretty minor gripe, if you even want to call it at all. But I will admit that for a documentary with lots of quotations and books, especially we just live in this age of YouTube and TikTok. I know that a lot of people would have trouble sitting through it probably. But that's the great thing about DVDs is you can hit the pause button, you can get up, and you can come back, you can sit down and finish it. But I know for someone who loves this material, if I felt that way, I know other people would feel that way. And the other thing is that the only other thing that I would really say about this documentary really implied, I really believe that Rome and the Jesuits, the Vatican, are really the center of the entire Illuminati New World Order power structure. I think the Illuminati is kind of this umbrella term. I think it's a real organization, but truthers use it as an umbrella term for this entire occult system. And I think the Bible really points back to Mystery Babylon in Revelation 17 is we have this world system that rules over the kings of the earth and even the merchants of the earth. And it's described in such detail, and it's described as a city that sits upon 7 mountains or 7 hills. I really do believe it's the city of Rome. And all these groups, the Masons or the OTO or the Illuminati, all of that I really believe is ruled by Rome and the Vatican and the Jesuits. The Jesuits are really at the top of it. They even control the Vatican itself at this point, because even Pope Francis himself is a Jesuit. In this documentary, it really kind of implied that. I mean, I would have loved to see it go into even more detail talking about that and laying that out, but I understand why it didn't, because he's talking about the Christian J Pinto has kind of covered some of those other aspects of this in other documentaries, so I completely understand that. Number two, I just talked about how it's already 2 hours and 50 minutes long. So if I'm saying, hey, I would have loved to have seen more, those are kind of contrary gripes. And then, and third, I understand that you got to keep things respectable and you got to quote, you got to stick close to your research, and I get all that. But I would have loved for it to go even further to say Rome is the center of the entire conspiracy, because there is a conspiracy, and I think this documentary implied it. I feel like it could have been said stronger, because I really do believe that that's the times we're living in. But I completely understand why it wasn't said. But all that being said, guys, I highly recommend this documentary. I really enjoyed it. I just wanted to include some criticisms, because that's what you do when you do a review. You talk about what you liked and you talk about what you don't like, and I think the content in this is excellent. It's timely. It's needed. I would just highly recommend this documentary. I just would say, a wise man doesn't answer a matter before he hears it. In my personal experiences, that Christians find this whole Jesuit issue to be kind of just a conspiracy theory, or it's not relevant. They don't care. People who are presented with this information, it's usually, I've experienced it multiple times in my life, where people can be very dismissive. They don't really care. It's just, it's somebody else's problem, whoop-de-doo. And I just think those who are wise and discerning, like, if you're really wondering the times we're living in, we're living in crazy times. We really are. I mean, with all the stuff that's been going on the world political scene, this documentary is going to give people a lot of help to figure out what's going on. It's not going to answer all your questions, but it's going to give you a great foundation for trying to figure out what's going on in the world. So that's really my review of American Jesuits, A History of Jesuitism in the United States by Christian J Pinto. If you guys want to look up, his website is AdullamFilms.com. I keep on my own website, Reformed Truther, there's a tab under ministries where I have links to a lot of other ministries that are beneficial and good. And Adullam Films I have listed there, so you can find the link to his website through my website. I probably will even include the link to his website on this video so that people can find it. And then, let me see. Yeah, he just has a lot of good, he has a newsletter on his site that's really good. And then all of his documentaries are available for purchase, including this one. So that's a really good place to start. But yeah, it's just a really good ministry. He's been putting out a lot of great content for a lot of years, so I've just been appreciative of that. So this is my review, guys, of American Jesuits. This is Joe Harper with Reformed Truther Ministries. God bless. If you enjoyed this video, then check out our website at www.reformedtruther.com.